back to Aina Bear Farm. It's another beautiful summer morning out here, and I wanted to share a video with you guys today talking about some of the most important design principles that we are putting into practice as we convert this roughly 3-acre pasture into food forest. And so these aren't necessarily, the exact verbatim permaculture principles, but they certainly are connected to those in very many ways, and they follow the practical design concepts that permaculture farmers all across the world use when they're designing a project like this. And so I'm going to give them to you sort of in order of their priority, although they're very connected and can kind of flip-flop over each other, so don't worry too much about that. And then we'll hopefully get to see some good examples of all of those things as we put them into practice. And so the first thing is we just kind of pan around the scope of the pasture is to work with what you have. Key word in that sentence is work with what you have. You never want to be working against what you have. And that's going to it's going to encompass all of the other priorities that we have here, because if you're really fighting against nature, you're in trouble to begin with. You're going to lose. Your inputs are always going to have to be higher than your outputs, all that type of stuff. And so what we have here is a north-facing slope. And so as I pan back towards the north, that is the ocean on the big island of Hawaii, Pacific Ocean, of course. So that's north. And therefore, as we go uphill, or mauka, as they say here, that would be south. And so if you were much further north of here, a north-facing slope would have a lot of shade and be a very cool, damp, darker ecosystem. Here, that's not necessarily the case. The sun does arch back in the winter, but nowhere near as much as it does anywhere in the continental US, for sure. That being said, it is still a factor, and it's something that we have to take into consideration when we're putting in trees and thinking about the shade that they'll cast downhill, or makai as they say here. And also just the fact that it's on a slope in general. We have to treat that very differently than we would a much flatter piece of property. What we've also inherited is a virtually wide open space planted with a mostly monoculture of what they call guinea grass. It's a clumping feed grass that's used for pasturing cattle and horses in this area. There's a handful of what I think are silky oak trees out there. And as we get, all the way back towards this back into the property, there's a few other trees, some ironwoods. There's actually some bananas down there at the edge of the property. And there's a big mango. But not much in the way of woody material out here. And therefore, this is a kind of a grassland ecosystem. It's bacterial dominant, and we'll come back to that when we talk more about soils. And then we'll also get into the type of soil that we've got here as well. So those are all kind of starting factors. There's also the size. Our total property is 4 acres. This parcel with the pasture is about 3 acres fenced in. And as far as land features go, it's got a few small divots. This is a ridge down here, so there is a low spot here, but otherwise it's just a pretty decent slope from the top to the bottom. So that's what we're starting with. Now we'll talk about some of the other principles that we need to think about as we design. All right, the next thing we want to discuss is water management. Obviously, you can't grow much without water. So that should be at the forefront of your mind when you're thinking about developing a food forest, regardless of whether it's something like this, where you're really overhauling an ecosystem, changing it from a lawn to a food forest, or a pasture to a food forest, or even if you have some established trees and some shade canopy in your area, you still need to be thinking about water. Where's it going to come from? How are you going to hold it? And how are you going to build water security? So common in permaculture practice is the use of swales and berm systems. And so we do cut our paths on contour. So this is a nice freshly cut path that can give an example of that. And there's tons of videos out there that you can check out for this, but essentially we measure points along the path that are flat. We use an A-frame level that we made here, and then we cut the path starting from the top, bring the soil down to the bottom to create a raised area that we call a berm. And so technically this could be called a swale, and then this would be the berm downhill, so that when water flows down, it hits this part, and then instead of continuing to go down and contributing to erosion, washing away the organic material, and not giving you good water storage, the water has time to go outwards along this contour, spread, and sink. Now that's the idea. Here, our soils are extremely porous, and so the water goes straight through. And so even in the biggest rainstorms, I've never seen these, I'm going to put air quotes, swales fill up with water. And that's why I'm using the air quotes, because it's not really a swale if it's not useful as a swale. So it's more of a path on contour. It does have a berm that could possibly catch, I don't know, if we ever get a hurricane or a massive tropical storm, maybe then we'll start to see some standing water. But I've seen 30 inches of rain fall in 5 days and not a drop of water to be seen standing anywhere. And so what tends to happen is the water soaks in where it falls. It definitely gets soaked up by the plant material. It's used up fast. It evaporates fast here with the high heat and humidity. But we very rarely see the soaking and spreading effect of the swales. But contour paths are great to have anyways. Again, this would combat erosion in any kind of flood event, so no reason not to, I think, build these types of systems no matter what. But they're not doing much to catch water, at least that we can see. I mean, there may, especially over time, be some really good benefits to just catching organic material here as it kind of comes down, and then that soaking up water and so forth. We do not have any other water catchment on the property at the moment. We do have plans for in the future to put some water catchment right in this area. Just a big cistern, I don't know, maybe at least 5,000 gallons, because this lower area here is going to be for crops, and it'll be a pretty heavy water dependent area. And so we'd love to have right uphill from there some gravity fed or gravity assisted water that we can store. And then as I pan up, there's our house. The water would come off the roof of the house down and then feed up that cistern right there. We are also building a water catchment on the back side of the house to catch that water as well, so we can pump to our kitchen garden or just fill up buckets and hand water things. We do have a hose that you can see laying out here that's hooked up to our city water. So we do get city water here. I think we're the last house on the street that has it. And then it's country after that. But so this is hooked up to city water. This allows us to at least water plants that are down here, fill up buckets which we can take and walk around. But that is exhausting and probably not sustainable in the long term as we continue to build out this system. So those are some of the ways that we manage water, some of the ways that we think about water. There are also other things that are tied into soil, which we're going to talk about next. All right, so we've got Lucky the farm cat's here to help us talk about our soils. So soils and soil building, definitely a huge priority for what you want to think about when you're building a food forest or just trying to put together a permaculture homestead. Here we have volcanic ash soil, of course, being an active volcano island, and these are the remnants of past volcanic activity. It's a very interesting soil. It's full of all kinds of size volcanic rock, which is kind of like this cool porous rock. Hard to get it to focus on that. There we go. It's kind of a neat porous rock. So a lot of surface area in there. Lets a lot of water through it, of course. And then the soil itself, I've talked a lot of times about how well it drains. I mean, you know, if you kind of just reach in and look at it, I mean, it's almost like really coarse sand as far as its drainage abilities, and pretty low in general in organic matter, at least on our property. There's no stickiness to this. It's pretty dry, even though it's under at least a little bit of mulch. We haven't had rain in a few days, but you wouldn't see much stickiness to it even after the rain. So this soil needs a lot of work to get to a point where it's going to be able to sustain a food forest, obviously. And so some of the things that we're doing, just very standard practices, trying to keep as much of the soil covered as possible. We cut this guinea grass and then throw it on any bare soil around all of our plants. So if I head up to this area, we have some seeds planted right here. It's going to be some pigeon peas to support a nearby rambutan tree, and we have those under that mulch, lock in that moisture. Here's the rambutan. So you kind of have these little like bird's nest. Peel that back a little bit. You might be able to see on camera, but there's a lot of moisture under here versus what we were just looking at. And then this here is another key to our soil building here in terms of adding organic material, and that is the manure from our rabbits. We have 2 rabbits, and I may make a video just on them someday because, I mean, for one, they're just adorable, and who doesn't like to look at videos of adorable rabbits? But number 2, they are incredible generators of very useful manure that does not burn the roots of the plants. It can be put down as an immediate plant food around the base of the plants like this. You can add it to your compost, you can put it in your worm bin, you can do all kinds of really great things to it. When you add it like this, it takes a little while for it to become available to the plants. It's got to kind of break down and become water soluble in the soil. But once it does, you see really good results. And then we add some of the straw that they also pee on, and we get a pretty decent amount from 2 standard sized rabbits. So in addition to being really great pets and very entertaining and a lot of fun, they provide us with that ability to constantly add organic material. I'm going to go over to another tree here, some mac nut. And down here at the bottom, a bunch of mac nut shells. Now those did not come from this tiny little mac nut tree, which has not produced yet. They came from a neighbor who brought me a bucket of mac nuts to eat, which was really nice of them, and I've been enjoying them, so thank you, neighbors. And but the point that I want to show here is that no organic material leaves this property at the moment. Besides our human manure, we do not have a compost toilet set up yet. That is something we'd like to look at in the future. But otherwise, we use diluted buckets of urine to fertilize. We save all of our vegetable scraps. Anything that we cut here stays on the property. We use it as mulch. If it's like a super weedy thing with like runner roots, like some of the Bermuda grass, that type of thing, then we lay it out on the hot black driveway to fry in the sun. And once it's good and dead and dry, and you got to really make sure, because that stuff can come back from the dead, then we will throw it on top of some mulch. But we try to compost everything we can here, make sure that everything is used, and that we don't let this priceless material leave here, because this is what's building our soil. And just constantly adding that. And so between our trees, you can see, here's a mac nut, there's a banana, right kind of hiding in there is an abiyu. And then all this grass here gets cut on a regular basis. I don't know, once every month, every 2 months, depends. Like this is probably about a month's worth of growth, 3-4 feet. And that's that guinea grass that grows really fast. But it's a great resource, because then all that green and all that nitrogen and all that, the silica and carbon that's in there, becomes the organic material that builds these little nests around the trees. Now that builds the soil, but going back to water management, this of course also locks in a lot of water and keeps it from escaping. So it's kind of a twofold principle there. All right, we'll be right back with another design principle for building our food forest. Hang tight. All right, the next idea I want to mention, just kind of quickly before we'll just roll right into the last design principle, it just has to do with pace. And it's kind of a quick thing, but I think that it's important to talk about. And so as I'm looking back up the hill, the property, we certainly think in terms of zones. And as we get closer to our house, we have the zone 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And it's a big enough property, in my opinion, to have a for real zone 5, where we'll have an area out here where we'll let it pretty much go wild, see what happens, put a few things in there, especially some native stuff to compete. But in terms of pacing, this has all been cut by hand, in the sense that I've cut all these paths with a mattock axe, just by hand, little by little. I've planted every plant by hand. All the organic material I've moved, all the watering, it's all been done by hand. And we haven't brought in any machines out here other than a gas-powered brush cutter, which is essentially, like a weed whacker with a blade attachment, so that we can cut down this grass and use it as mulch and clear areas so that we can see what we're doing. And actually it's really hard to work in the full height of this stuff. And the reason that we are using that, the reason we're doing all that stuff by hand, has to do with pace. When I can go slow enough like that, it actually gives me time to observe the property and to understand what's happening before I go too gung-ho and make silly mistakes that I have to go back and fix, or in some cases, things that might be irreparable. And I think that that's really important, because you could come out here, this is also a budgetary issue for me. I simply can't afford to do something like this, but you could come out here with heavy machinery and, just strip this entire thing, and then bring in truckloads of mulch, flatten out huge paths, dig dams, and put in, poly liners to hold water, and put in all kinds of irrigation, gravity-fed piping. And I mean, you could do a huge system out here that would, first of all, probably cost you tens of thousands of dollars to do that. Plant all your plants at the same time, buy, lots of bigger stock plants, not planting things from seed. So many things you could do that would get you some production faster, but you would not have that slow enough pace to give yourself time to observe. So for me, working at a slow pace allows me to do things and make progress, and to see great things happening that keeps me motivated and engaged. When I see my trees growing and see things flowering and stuff like that, and I get a little bit closer to getting some fruit off of some of these, that keeps me excited. But at the same time, I always have something new to do. And I don't mind the work. I love spending time outside. So this slow, doing stuff by hand is the right pace for me. And that doesn't mean that's right for you or for every property. I'm just sharing that with you guys, that's something that we do here, and I've really gotten a lot of benefit from it. So for the last thing, I'm just going to talk about succession, and we'll just stay with this shot, looking back around the uphill at the food forest. And so by succession, what I'm really getting at is something I kind of touched on a minute ago, that you want to have some things produce in the short run. We do have a kitchen garden where we're getting a lot of fresh produce for our family. You want to be thinking long term. I have some mangosteen seedlings that I planted one from seed that may not fruit for 15 years or so. And then you want to be thinking on that spectrum with everything in between, like stuff that's going to fruit in a year, 2 years, 5 years. And so by that, what I really mean is to just try to plan some things so that you're not waiting 5 years before you have any production at all. Because if I had come out here and just started clearing things and putting in support species like nitrogen fixers, stuff that was going to build woody material, really get this soil ready, yes, that would have been a stronger ecosystem to start with. I would not have needed as much inputs like some liquid fertilizers that we use for our trees. I probably would lessen like pest pressures and things like that. But then I'd have to wait years for that to mature. And in the meantime, I wouldn't be getting any production at all. But there's things that you can get quick production out of pretty easily. With the bananas, we have pretty much just used diluted urine to fertilize those with. And we've got our first rack of bananas that's coming in now, and it's looking great. And so, there's ways to do a little bit of both. And that's what I mean by succession. So you kind of plan things in a way that you can get some stuff in the short run while you're still building your soil, you're still building for the future. We've got tons of support plants planted out here, nitrogen fixing plants, all between all of our little fruit trees planted out there, and they will pretty quickly throw up some shade and start fixing nitrogen, getting some woody material, and they'll outpace some of the specialty fruit trees that we've put in there. But we also have some trees, like if you've seen our food forest tour, like this ulu tree over here that is doing really well, putting on a lot of its own woody and green material. And so, I would have hated to wait several years to put that in just because, I wanted to put some support trees around it to pump up the soil. So that's kind of how we've been thinking about our design here. I hope that was interesting, helpful. We're going to do some future videos where we'll talk about, I want to talk about what are some, I don't know if I'd call them mistakes, but they're like things that if I had known when I started that I would have done differently. I think that would be interesting and helpful. And we'll definitely talk more about water management, especially as we put in our catchment cisterns, do some videos on those as well. If there's anything else you'd like to see us go into more in depth, let us know in the comments. Or if you just have any interesting comments or questions based on the content of this video, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And otherwise, we will see you soon again back here at Ina Bear Farm. Aloha.